Oji Rose, and today we're going to be talking about notes from the pod. 5 essays on simulation by Owain, who also goes by Raymond K Hessle. You can find his YouTube page, and I highly suggest it. Raymond covers books and topics that a lot of people don't, and the insight that he brings to those topics and that he garners from them and shares with others is invaluable, and I greatly respect his work. He's talked about Fukuyama, he's talked about Paul Virilio with the great Joshua Hansen, who also has a book coming out soon. He's explored very fascinating dimensions of Plato's Republic that I found just very, very inspiring, and I've written quite a number of essays and pieces inspired by Raymond. So I'm grateful for his work, and this is his book called Notes from the Pod that has come out in 2022. It is divided into 5 sections. The first is called Movement, then Surrogates, then Armor, Copies, and Filters, and each section builds upon the last. The first section is going to be talking about Plato's Cave and how today Plato's Cave is mobile. It is a pod. It is not stuck in a single location where we can define inside the cave clearly from outside the cave, because if the cave doesn't move, we can have a sense of when we're in it and when we are not in it. This makes me think of ideology. This makes me think of technology, ideas, and all these different things, and that following Plato, it's easier to place illusion and to separate illusion from truth. And indeed, the subtitle to part 1 is Separating and Placing Illusion. Raymond's insight is that today the pod seems to be like Plato's Cave is more of a pod. It's something mobile. And as a result, we can't clearly tell where the cave begins and where it ends. In a sense, it's all cave. And I remember Alexander Bard making a point like that in one of his works. And so the cave has become mobile. Raymond also gave a presentation on this idea that can be found at Johannes's YouTube page, Classical Philosophy, that I enjoyed. And Raymond himself has a video on this topic on his YouTube channel that should be looked at. But what does it mean today when the cave is mobile? And there's something to be said also about how nice it is to believe that the cave is set in stone, that it has a particular location. Because then it can make us feel as if we can know when we're in ideology or outside of ideology, when we are being controlled by technology and when we're not being controlled by technology. But if it is mobile, if it can be anywhere, and if it's something we can take with us, well, that's a problem. It is no longer so easy to tell where the cave is and where the cave is not. And Raymond does a good job of exploring the theme of the pod, which we see in movies like The Matrix, Elysium, Star Wars, and different things. And really, we can see what Raymond is telling us as a kind of call to arms, which makes me think about Ontological Design by Daniel Frege, who tells us that we're always already in the middle of ontological design, and we need to armor up, is a kind of language that Raymond uses. And for Daniel Frege, ontological design, taking that seriously, is a kind of Second Amendment, something that it's about self-defense. And indeed, if the cave has become mobile, if it has become a pod, then we really need to take self-defense and take seriously the situation we're in. So I am a big fan of this idea of Plato's Cave now being mobile in a pod. And I think the way that Raymond explores the topic, he gets into far more detail in his essay than I'm getting into here, really kind of elaborates on what the implications of that is for us today. And he also will point out how there's a funny way in which, if we're all inside on our computers, on Zoom, on YouTube, there's a way in which we're turning our own homes into caves, Plato's caves. And really, we just spend our lives decorating our cave, is language he used, decorating the circumstance which we've been ontologically designed into. And I find that a very powerful and moving insight. In the context of this essay, Raymond references Paul Virilio, who kind of asks us the question, at what point are we no longer living beings? At what point have we adopted ourselves so much to our technology and our quote-unquote cave that we really lose something that makes us human? At what point does that occur? And if the cave is mobile, if the cave is something we're always in because we're always willingly taking it with us, do we even have the capacity to tell anymore where the cave begins and where the cave ends? And I thought the way that Raymond phrased that was very, very good. The next part, surrogates, started off with an exploration of Blade Runner 2049. One of the things I like about Raymond's work is the way that he explores these cultural artifacts. And he'll discuss in Blade Runner how you have a girlfriend that doesn't have a body, but is visual, you can hear, and how she's missing touch. And I actually found that Raymond's exploration of how touch for Aristotle is different from the other senses, that it's not just, that's a kind of medium that breaks the line between physical and non-physical, that kind of defines those ways. That touch, we could say, to tie to the first part, is intricate in being able to tell where the cave begins and where the cave ends. And if nothing can be touched, then we really do lose a profound manner of which to identify reality from fantasy. Raymond will discuss how, in a way, what ends up happening is we view our bodies as kind of surrogates for our minds, and we treat our bodies as an inconvenience, something we want to get out of the way of, that no longer physically bothers us, that no longer troubles us, but the cost for escaping the body and just being pure mind, as we see in these sci-fi movies, is that we lose the ability of touch. And since touch is not merely a sense, but it's kind of medium for a kind of way of defining reality from not, that's a really big deal. And he does a brilliant job of exploring the new Blade Runner movie on how you get everything you want in your imaginary perfect girlfriend, you just can't touch her. That's profound, because it does seem as if we get our dating apps, we get our YouTube, we get all these different things, and we can see, we can hear the individual, but we can't touch them. Arguably, we can't smell them either. But smell, very often we go through life not smelling, right? I mean, I don't smell anything really in this office right now, but touch, I am always touching. So touch seems to be much closer to what keeps us grounded, to what keeps us feeling like we know what the real is. And the way that he explores Aristotle's take on touch is just very profound. And I suggest the book so you can go into the details and depths of his explanation. Part 3 is going to be talking about armor, and it has elaborations on the history of monsters, and monster talk is what he'll get into. And you go back to classical thought in the Greeks, where the line between gods and monsters was very thin. And there's a lot of God talk today on the loss of God and how that affects us after Nietzsche and so on and so forth. But whatever happened to the monster talk? And we don't really believe in monsters anymore. He starts off the essay talking about Jaws and how Zizek says that Jaws, Zizek will comment on how Jaws kind of represents global capitalism and ideology in general, and how it's a kind of monster. And you see what ends up happening is when there are no monsters to fight, it becomes very easy to become a last man instead of an overman, because there are no monsters. There is no entity by which to confront and to attack. And this is going to get us into Thomas, which I struggle to say, but Raymond's elaborations on that topic are really, really good. He explores how Hercules kills the super lion, the Nemean lion, this kind of godlike creature that terrorized the Greek countryside, that Hercules destroyed this beast with his bare hands. And what's interesting is that Raymond will explore that there's something about, as humans armor up with technologies, they actually become weaker. That as we gain these weapons and these computers, and we seem to become greater, that we actually lose something in that process. That there's precisely something about the human's inability to, say, have claws and fur and to be a monster or an animal like the other creatures on the planet, that actually is precisely the source of his power. He goes into the rich mythology of monsters and how when mankind was made in that Greek story, the god went through all the animals, gave them fur, gave them claws, gave them all these skills. And when it came to man, he forgot, oh crap, I have nothing to give man. And so what ends up happening is Prometheus, who feels bad for man, he'll get man fire. And basically what ends up happening is humanity gains the ability to work together. They gain intellect, they gain the ability to socialize. And it's precisely because they are so weak that they don't have fur and that they can't handle the cold elements, that this weakness forces man to think and to work together and to use his intellect. And so there's a way that man's weakness ends up being the source of his strength. And so if we gain technologies that make us stronger, does that actually take us out of the condition where we realize the fullness of our capacity and strength? And Raymond has this line, militancy as nakedness, where really our source is a kind of technological nakedness, where then if we overuse technology, what this means is that we lose our power. And I think we see that with, the use of screens, that all of these kind of technologies that seem to be symbolic of our ability actually make us weaker. And so now that's not to say technology is all bad, but that means we have to find the correct blend. We have to think of the right way by which to use technology, or we might end up in trouble. And so what's fascinating is that there's something where humans need to strip down to be gods, to be more godlike, that they need to reduce. And Raymond will talk about some of the martial arts, some of the kind of practices of self-defense that understood that going for the biggest weapon is indication of weakness, that strength is found in a certain limitation on the self, and that if we fail to engage in this, and this comes up in the next section on clones, there's going to be a ontological death, which is far worse than physical death. And this will also lead us into the topic of themos, which again, I struggle to say this word, but it's a very interesting concept. Now, the section on copies really raises this interesting question where it shows that younger generations, and he's going to talk about the Platonic dialogue of latches, it really shows that if we just copy the older generations, or we say just inherit what they achieved, that there's something spiritually lacking. It will not simply do to copy the past or to use the technologies they have. There's something in the soul which requires raising to the occasion. And, it's interesting because in that dialogue latches, there's really this sense in which younger generations are bitter at the generations that came before them for not giving them an opportunity to prove themselves, to earn their condition, that instead the older generation simply succeeded, created the civilization, created the empire, and then handed it to their children. And there's something about that handing down greatness or success to younger generations, so younger generations can just copy it, that deprives younger generations, that they're bitter about. They lose a kind of spiritness, and that's another way we can talk about thymos, THYMOS, and Raymond has some tremendous videos on that, and since I struggle to pronounce this word, I will say spirit. So when older generations pass success to younger generations, there's a kind of spirit that is lost, a spiritedness that is lost, that really sets the younger generation up to be last men, as Nietzsche will talk about, which is a kind of ontological death. And there's something about passing on technologies that really scream of this loss of spirit, as we're seeing today. And there's a kind of bitterness that young people can feel because of it, because they need to feel like they rise to the occasion of spirit and earn spirit. Well, this kind of suggests then that history has a tension embedded right into it, because what are older generations supposed to do? Not pass anything down? One of the things that motivates them is to take care of their children and to look after their children. So this right here, for me, what's so interesting about this is it suggests that there's more complicated dynamics to the human condition than simply taking care of them. There also is something in us that needs to earn our situation. And if we don't earn it, then we feel a lack of spirit that feels like an ontological death. And so I really appreciate this work. And what's interesting is Raymond also talks about in his videos how for Fukuyama, that one of the things that capitalism does is provide a way to create, to address thymos or spirit by giving us a chance to earn respect, to climb the corporate ladder, and so on and so forth. But there's questions of if capitalism fully can succeed to address thymos, which I think the rising up of popularism today, say in Trump or on the left or whatnot, shows perhaps that the spiritedness that humans need is not being addressed by global capitalism, that people don't feel seen or respected, or they feel denied any opportunity to achieve glory. And so they respond quite poorly to that. But older generations are in the business, they want to make the world a better place. But in succeeding in that, they can remove opportunities for the development and address of thymos. So that's quite a profound tension that is in the works there. And then, of course, the question becomes, how do governments deal with that? And if it's not dealt with, it makes me think of the Edmund Burke distinction between beauty and sublime, where for him, the sublime is this kind of political, socio-political death drive that takes over the culture. It has a kind of sexual libido to it. It makes me think of Freud. I think Burke's sublimity, which I had forgotten, honestly, this distinction until I revisited it a few weeks ago, where beauty is what is culture, what holds a society together, where the sublime is a kind of death drive. And it makes me think that if spirit is not addressed, if thymos is not addressed, then sublime is going to take over and it's going to destroy the society. And arguably, a lot of the popularism happening today is very much an example of Burke's sublimity. The final part 5, filters. There's a story in there of people seeing a man being killed by a shark. And rather than scream or try to save the man, there's nothing they can do. They just film it. And they just film it. They just stand there. And there's something about this that screams the condition of the world today, where we don't necessarily even know how to respond or what to feel when we see a shark killing someone. We don't know what to do. It's as if our very experience has been filtered by the technological apparatus, by screens, by capturing, by these different technologies. And what does that say about us? It screams a loss of thymos. It screams a loss of spiritedness. And that's a great problem. Now, I should clarify that a lot of the story about the shark is actually in the section on armor in the book. But it came to mind as I was reading Filters, because we indeed have filtered our experience in such a manner to make us not really able to respond to a shark attack. And Raymond is going to talk about the movement of the biotechnological apparatus. He's going to talk about politicals, which reminds me of how we respond to those encroachments on us as individuals. That is taking away our ability to tell the difference between the inside and outside of the cave. It makes me think of that shark attack from the section on armor. And he brings us all together to suggest the need of a return of thymos, of spiritedness. And if we don't regain that, we're probably not going to escape Deleuzian capture. We probably will end up captured by the state, by the corporations, and things like that. And so we have to regain that spiritedness, that thymos. But that is going to require a certain level of stripping down, a certain giving up of the tools that we think empower us, that actually weaken us. And that will also force us to intentionally regain a life where touch plays a big role, because without touch, we can't tell the difference between the fake and the real. Touch is more than just a sense, it's a very medium. And if we don't have touch, we won't be able to tell the difference between the inside and outside of a cave. And we're always already in the middle of this battle to take away our ability to tell the difference between the inside and outside of the cave, this battle of what Frege calls ontological design. And I think we see in Raymond's book some tools, some ways of thinking, some mental models by which to better fight this battle and to help us regain spiritedness, which we need today more than ever. So you can find the book. There are links on Raymond's page. You can find it on Twitter. It's on Gumroad. It's called Notes from the Pod. I am a big fan of Raymond's work. I appreciate what he has done there. And be sure to pick up a copy today.